What the fastest way you've seen someone ruin their life? When I lived in Vegas, I saw all these people come in and bet it all on black, then lose. Then the stare of disbelief as they realize their mortgage is gone and they have to explain that to whomever they had left at home. I remember a trip to Vegas when we got separated from our friend and she was trying to meet up by the casino credit office. Anyway, we didn't know where it was, so we asked an employee. He straight up refused to point us in the direction. Even when we explained we didn't want any credit, he would absolutely not tell us where it was. Guess he didn't want to see a bunch of dipshit kids ruin their lives at the casino credit office. I respect that man, looking out for young people. Do they have actual offices to loan you money in casinos? Or am I reading this wrong? In the Air Force, this new guy joins and goes out to a bar, then decides to drive home. Gets a DUI, loses all his rank, has to pay a ton in fines, but leadership fought for him and he was allowed to stay in the Air Force. 2 months later, as he's paying tons of lawyer and legal fees, he does something really stupid. Drives home from the same bar drunk and gets arrested. Loses his license and gets kicked out of the military. So loses all his income while he's thousands of dollars in debt. That's not even the worst part. A few months later, he celebrates being a civilian again by, you guessed it, going to the same bar, then driving home drunk, arrested and put in jail for a while. I can't imagine he has many future career opportunities with a less than honorable discharge and an arrest record. Edit. I should have added that the third DUI included charges for driving without a license since he had it suspended after the second. 3 DUIs in my state puts you on wanted lists and gets you prison. Unfortunate. Also, you figure the bar is calling the cops at that point. Haha. It was a really shitty bar. 2. This was in Tucson. About 50 years ago, when my great uncle was in his early 20s, he drove home so drunk that he ran over and killed 2 college students and didn't even realize it. After his initial incarceration, he didn't know how to function as a free citizen, so he keeps getting himself sent back to jail. For example, he got out of jail around a year ago and couldn't make his first month's rent. His solution was to walk to the convenience store, steal a beer, and sit on the curb waiting for the cops to arrive. I'm just picturing him getting back into the cell and letting out a sigh of relief. Home sweet home. It's unfortunately a huge problem with prisons, especially when you send in kids for 40 years and let them out in their 50s. I believe the term is being institutionalized. ETA. Everyone is mentioning the Shawshank Redemption as a great example, so I'm gonna put that out there before my inbox dies. Yeah, I remember being in county jail with a guy. I was in for 24 hours. And this guy was a lifer. I always thought lifer was someone who got life, but he explained to me that a lifer is someone in and out for life. When the bus came to get him, he said, "Finally going home boys, see you in 8:10," and walked out with his prison jumpsuit on and got on the dock bus. It really is sad. High school acquaintances were partying underage and some other kids with drama were buzzing the party in some stupid loud car. Drunk guy thinks the best way to handle this is to throw a huge paving stone at the car on one of its passes. Stone goes through window, hits passenger, mid-body lap, not head. Driver panics and refuses to take passenger to hospital. Apparently everybody was under the influence. She bled out of internal injuries in the hours that followed. Guy who threw the stone is still in prison for manslaughter. ETA sorry, whoa, here are some answers to the best of my ability. No charges against the driver. Sorry. Yes. Still in jail. Very reticent from all reports. Was trying to mess up car, not people. Doesn't excuse it. Just a detail about intent. Also, I should have maybe rephrased how I know of these people. We were high school age when we met briefly. Not I knew them through my own high school. Did the driver get charged for not taking her to the hospital? Depending on where this happened. In a lot of places there's no obligation for bystanders to help an injured person. If you're walking down the street and you come across someone bleeding out on the sidewalk, you can just walk the fuck away and you won't have committed a crime. The legal responsibility lies entirely with whoever attacked them. WTF. In France you have a legal obligation to help in that case. Where TF do you live where you can just say nah, can't be bothered and let someone die? He's 18 and thinks he's a minor? Where I'm from, If you're 17 and get arrested, you go to big boy jail. Yep, that confused me too. I didn't treat him on scene as the cop had him in cuffs, and I went straight to the kids huddled in the field as the rain fell down. I was more worried about shock and hypothermia than a spoiled brat. Young, dumb, and selfish. I keep meaning to look him up on court view. My state is really open with cases, but haven't. But I went to school with a group of kids this happened to, almost exact. We weren't friends, but I knew them in passing. As far as I know, no one lit anything on fire for the group I'm talking about. But my building made an announcement at the beginning of the day right after it happened explaining that so and so was going to be out for several months. We should give her support but also space. That kind of thing. Turns out when the car flipped, she fell out and shattered most of the bones in her legs. She was out for so long to do some intense rehab physical therapy. As far as I know, she's kicking behind these days. Kid who was driving the car went to jail, despite being a minor. Dropped out of a very good college with a full scholarship that his family could never have afforded otherwise, after 3 years due to World of Warcraft addiction. No, this wasn't me. I managed my addiction responsibly. Edit. We are thinking of different guys. The fact that dozens of replies are hey, I know this guy is disconcerting but not unexpected. Edit. I played WoW from release through Cataclysm but never really had a problem walking away from it to focus on life, which is probably the experience of most of the player base. After I quit, I started having intrusive thoughts about relapsing, even 8 years later, but have never felt that I'd give in to that. I knew someone that happened to too. It was crazy. He was so smart and normal beforehand. The smart doesn't stop. If you looked at their gameplay they would probably be approaching it with a problem-solving mindset, not an enjoyment one. Smart kids get bored. Bored kids look for engagement. Smart. Bored kids look for a difficult game with no IRL pressure to perform. Hence, row. Yep. Friend in high school initially got heavy into Dark Age of Camelot, then on to WoW. He's in his mid-30s. Still lives with his parents and plays WoW all day. I had an acquaintance who was pretty successful, early 30s, good job, homeowner, etc. His next door neighbors had custody of their niece, a 16-year-old cheerleader who was home alone all the time. They struck up a friendship. Need I say more? Actually, yes. The cops stop him randomly with her in the passenger seat. They hid her since she looks young. Call her guardians, who deny that he has permission to take her anywhere. Here's the thing. They had crossed a county line. Boom. Kidnapping charge. They break him in interrogation and he admits to sex. Boom. Statutory rape charges. They convince him to unlock his phone and find her nudes in his inbox. Boom. Child pornography charges. Boom goes the cell door. Really sounds like he deserved all that though. Can't feel bad for him. Just imagine that sewed song. Boom. 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 Went to school with a kid who threw a rock off an overpass and killed a dude. Whole life down the drain at that point. Made international news. Edit. Flint, Michigan. Imagine being the dude that got hit. Just living your life driving home from work 1 second, literally dead the next. This life is something else. My friend is a teacher. She teaches the kids who dad was killed and said she just watched the poor kid deteriorate after the dad died. Super sad and really an effed up situation. Reminds me of a story I read called The First Stone. It's about some kids who toss a stone off an overpass and end up bucking up some innocent girl driving below. She's badly injured. As his punishment, the thrower is sentenced to community service, which he does at the hospital where this girl is recovering, and ultimately ends up being her buddy. Nothing sexual. Seriously, so to speak. I won't spoil any more in case you'd like to read it. I was there when my older brother tried heroin for the first time. Fast forward 15 years and he is constantly going to the hospital for abscesses that appear on his arms and legs and is almost completely cut off from the rest of the family because he's robbed our parents more than once every few years, he swears. He is going to kick the habit. The first few times we collectively ponied up cash to send him to rehab and tried to be as supportive as we could. After the 10th relapse or so, we're too exhausted to even pretend to be hopeful about his newest attempt to get clean. Edit. Thanks for all of the positive feedback. My brother is an on-again, off-again drug addict. I have no hope he will ever really get clean. He's been clean before for a year or two at a time and then will start back up again. He's been married 3 times and has an adult son who he had nothing to do with. Only family would forgive 10 relapses. I had a friend years back, always kind of an odd guy, but he had a good heart. Anyway, one day, I was hanging out with him and a few other friends and he told us he was going to get a tattoo tomorrow and had this super cool idea. But he wouldn't tell us what it was because he wanted it to be a surprise. We saw him about a week later. He had tattooed 3/4S of his face green. Like, no design or anything. Just solid dark forest green. Basically, he just left the top right quarter of his face normal and the rest was all green. He had been immediately fired from his job the day after getting the tattoo. I kind of lost touch with him shortly after that. Since he moved to another city, I'd heard he wound up living in his car. No idea why he did what he did. He'd had a very good job in IT at a pretty big company and was making decent money. No clue why he thought permanently turning 3/4 of his face green would be super awesome. This is absolutely mental illness. A friend of mine seemed totally cool most of the time. I knew she had bipolar disorder but she was fine on her meds. She stopped taking her meds and called me one night on the side of the road right after she cut all her hair off. I picked her up, gave her a buzz cut to even it out a bit and called her therapist. She got back on her meds and has been fine for the last few years. If I hadn't known already about her mental illness I would have been shocked by what she did. Yep, that seems very likely. He wasn't a super close friend and he was a few years older than us. We were just out of university, so we were still at an age where that sort of mattered, you know? So we had never really talked about that sort of stuff. It certainly wouldn't surprise me, though. I have quite a few friends with fairly severe mental illness and I've seen them do some pretty disturbing things. What kind of tattoo artist goes for that kind of job anyway? That just sounds like bad PR waiting to happen. Early 90s. My friend was a sweet theater nerd who went to the same college as me. She started hanging out with a sketchy crowd and ignoring her old friends, especially when we tried to tell her she was losing herself. She ended up moving to Seattle to hang with her new friends. Growing up, she was the most sober person in our group. She never even drank alcohol, much less did any drugs. But 6 months later, she was dead of a heroin overdose. One of my best childhood friends also died this way, but a bit more slowly. We hung out nearly every weekend from 2nd grade until 9th. In 9th grade, he really started to struggle with his image identity. He had always been the class clown, but never really one of the cool kids. One day he showed up decked out in skater gear from Paxson and became friends with some junkies. He started using heroin and I stopped hanging out with him. A couple years later we reconnected. He had convinced everybody that he had beaten the addiction and was moving on with his life. During our college years, I went to a university about 45 minutes away and he started taking classes at a local community college. We would hang out on weekends sometimes whenever I was in town. 7 years later he was still going to the community college and was perpetually 1 or 2 classes away from finally graduating. I ended up joining the Navy. A few years later I got a call that he had died in his sleep after a blood vessel burst in his brain. Apparently long-term heroin use sometimes results in such problems. Doctors discovered he had been using, even though he could never get his shit together. He was actually a remarkably smart and genuinely interesting person. I never bothered him about his lack of ambition because I figured he was off of drugs and that was good enough. Now I'm pretty much middle-aged and I still miss him. That's the funny thing about dope addicts, man. People behind they are dumb or lowlifes. But back when I was using I knew plenty of whip smart people who got into using, wanted to shut their overactive brains off, had to be good at creative problem solving, etc etc. I was in grade 11, at a party and 6 other older guys I kinda knew disappeared to the basement, while I stayed and talked to the girls. I went downstairs to see what was going on and all of them were shooting drugs, most for the first time, and sharing the needle. This was around the time AIDS was thought to be a gay disease. I noped out of there. After grad never saw them again. Ran into one of the guys a few years ago. He was the only one still alive and had bad hep C, daily dialysis for many years waiting for a transplant. All the others were dead due to getting both AIDS and hep C. It took 10 or 15 years to wreck their lives, but the actual action took 5 seconds.